She thought it was just another quiet evening flight home, until the gate agent ripped her passport in half and triggered a national scandal. On that humid evening at Atlanta's bustling Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, Denise Carter felt the deep, bone-tired weariness that only came after finishing a high-stakes mission. For 10 straight days, she had lived out of a sterile hotel room in Miami, leading a secret federal audit to test airport security systems nationwide. The operation, her own brainchild, had pushed her to the brink, demanding she disguise herself as everything from a nervous first-time flyer to a demanding executive. Now, wearing her simple gray joggers, a faded Howard University sweatshirt, and old sneakers, Denise just wanted to disappear into her seat in first class and drift off for the 2-hour flight back to Washington, D.C. First class was her small reward seat, with space to breathe, a place to let the relentless tension of undercover work melt away. She moved calmly through the terminal, her black backpack slung over one shoulder, carrying only her laptop, a novel, and the thick file of confidential findings that could soon reshape national aviation security. As she approached Gate B-32, crowded with business travelers, families, and weary couples, her eyes scanned the crowd with the quiet vigilance of someone trained to notice every small detail. She had no idea that tonight, her final task wouldn't be in a secure airport operations room, but right here, facing a gate agent's arrogance that would explode into one of the biggest airline scandals in American history. Denise stood near Gate B-32, soaking in the familiar, controlled chaos of an airport evening rush. The rolling echo of suitcases muffled boarding announcements, and the soft murmur of families and business travelers alike. Her eyes fell on the gate agent, whose polished name tag read Cynthia. Cynthia was in her late 40s, with a helmet of blonde hair sprayed into immovable submission and thin lips turned perpetually downward in disapproval. As Denise waited, she noticed how Cynthia's demeanor shifted depending on who stood before her. When a smiling white family asked about their seat upgrades, Cynthia's voice turned syrup-sweet cooing to the children and assuring the parents all was perfect. But when an elderly Indian man shuffled up timidly to ask if the flight was on time, Cynthia didn't even look up snapping idle board when it boards. Denise exhaled softly, recognizing what she called authority bias when people with even the smallest power use it to create hierarchies rooted in prejudice. Tonight, she was just grateful her long mission was ending and soon should be in her own bed. When pre-boarding was announced, she joined the short first-class line. She approached Cynthia calmly, offering her phone with the digital boarding pass and her U.S. passport worn but pristine. Cynthia's sharp blue eyes flicked from Denise's brown face to her gray sweatshirt lingering at the Howard University logo before narrowing suspiciously. "A passport for a domestic flight," she asked, her voice dripping with contempt. Denise kept her tone steady, replying, "It's my primary form of government ID. It's valid." But Cynthia wasn't listening. She flipped through the pages dismissively, held it up to the light, squinted at the photo, then smirked. "This picture doesn't look like you," she scoffed, tapping the laminated page with a manicured nail. "Doctor of Philosophy Art History, I bet." Denise felt the words land like tiny slaps. She exhaled quietly and said with professional clarity, "My doctorate is in aeronautical engineering. Is there a problem with my document? Or may I board the plane?" Cynthia's smile faded into a thin, cruel line as her eyes gleamed with an arrogance that signaled what was about to come. A confrontation that would not end here at the gate, but would spiral into something far bigger than either of them imagined. Cynthia leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, though loud enough for the passengers in line behind Denise to hear. "There's a problem with me believing this is a legitimate document," she sneered. Denise felt the words hit like a cold slap. Her passport wasn't new, but it was in pristine condition. She treated all her federal IDs with careful respect. She could sense the people in line growing restless behind her, shifting and murmuring at the tension building between the neatly dressed gate agent and the calm woman in joggers. Denise kept her voice even, despite her patience fraying. "I assure you it's legitimate," she said firmly. "You can verify it using your system." But Cynthia wasn't interested in verification. Her thin lips curled into a cruel smirk as she tilted her head slightly, scanning Denise from head to toe with unmasked disdain. "Or maybe you bought it," she hissed, her words slicing through the air like a blade. "People like you are very resourceful. I've seen it all: fake IDs, fake credit cards, fake everything." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Denise felt her blood run cold, not with fear, but with the icy clarity of righteous anger. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was racism laid bare, a direct accusation of criminality targeted at her skin color and her quiet dignity. Denise inhaled slowly, feeling the steel of her years of federal training settle in her chest. She spoke with calm authority, her words clipped and deliberate. "Ma'am, you are making serious, unfounded accusations. Scan the document, verify it, or call your supervisor. But you will not stand here and slander me." Around them, the murmur of the line turned into a heavy silence. Cynthia's eyes narrowed further, a strange, vindictive gleam flashing across her face, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Oh, it'll do more than that," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Then, with a sudden savage twist of her wrists, she ripped Denise's passport clean in half, the tearing sound echoing across gate B32, like a gunshot sucking the air out of the room in an instant. For a brief moment after the rip, there was absolute silence. Passengers stood frozen in disbelief, their wide eyes flicking between the torn halves of Denise's passport, now lying limp on the counter, and Cynthia's triumphant smirk. The gate agent puffed out her chest, as if she had just vanquished an enemy basking in what she believed was a small, righteous victory. But what she didn't see, what no one saw, was the shift happening inside Denise Carter in that instant. The exhausted traveler in gray joggers disappeared, replaced by the steely resolve of a federal investigator whose life's work was to protect national security. Denise stared at her severed passport, her mind moving with the crystalline clarity of years spent running covert audits and enforcement operations. Cynthia thought she had humiliated a random black woman she deemed unworthy of first class. In truth, she had just declared war on someone with the power to dismantle her entire career, and the system enabling her arrogance. Denise raised her gaze, slowly locking eyes with Cynthia. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and unnervingly calm, yet carried across the silent gate with authority that made people straighten unconsciously. "You have just destroyed a United States federal document," she said. "That is a federal offense under Title 18, Section 1543 of the U.S. Code mutilation or alteration of a passport, punishable by up to 25 years in prison." For the first time that evening, Cynthia's smirk faltered. A flicker of confusion and fear crossed her face as passengers began whispering around them. She opened her mouth to protest, but Denise cut her off, her voice firm and unyielding. "You did not follow procedure. You didn't scan it. You didn't verify it under UV light. You escalated this out of personal bias and unlawful prejudice." The people in line stood riveted, phones silently recording as Cynthia fumbled for words. But Denise was already reaching into her backpack with measured precision, pulling out her phone. She didn't dial 911. Instead, she tapped a single contact. "Director Evans," she said, when the line picked up her tone, brisk, cold, and professional. This is Carter. I'm invoking Code Black on Operation Safe Skies. I have an active security breach at Ascend Air Gate B32. I need TSA and FBI airport liaison on site immediately. In that moment, Cynthia realized her small victory had triggered something far bigger than she could ever contain. Within minutes, the quiet hum of the boarding area transformed into a charged, almost electric atmosphere. Two uniformed airport police officers appeared at the jet bridge entrance, their radios crackling as they scanned the scene with serious eyes. Behind them came two figures in dark suits, moving with the confident, deliberate strides of federal agents. Passengers stepped back instinctively, creating a wide circle around Denise and Cynthia. The agent who had once sneered with smug satisfaction now stood frozen, her face pale and her manicured hands trembling slightly at her sides. The silence was broken only by the nervous rustle of papers and the soft clicks of smartphone cameras capturing every detail. Denise stood calmly at the counter, her phone still in hand. As the agents approached, she spoke, her voice carrying a tone that left no room for doubt. Agents Davies and Chen. She greeted them without pleasantries. Subject is Cynthia Parks, gate agent for Ascend Air. She has destroyed a valid federal document and made repeated racist, unfounded accusations while refusing to follow standard verification protocol. Agent Chen. A sharp-eyed woman with her dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, glanced at the two torn halves of the passport on the counter and nodded grimly. Well, preserve it as evidence. She pulled out an evidence bag, while her partner, a tall man with a quiet strength in his demeanor, donned nitrile gloves and used tweezers to lift the torn passport pieces delicately into the bag. Passengers watched in stunned silence as the agents moved with precise professionalism. Cynthia's breathing quickened as the reality settled on her shoulders. She tried to find her voice, but when she spoke, it came out in a trembling whisper. This is a misunderstanding. I thought it was fake." Her eyes darted desperately to her station supervisor. Frank Matthews, who had arrived moments earlier, his face flushed and sweaty with panic. He looked from Cynthia to Denise to the federal agents, calculating his options with every shallow breath. But Denise didn't even look at him. She stood tall, her presence commanding. "You didn't think," she replied coldly. "You profiled. You destroyed federal property. And now you've triggered a national security investigation." The entire gate area seemed to hold its breath. For Denise Carter, there was no turning back now. The investigation she had designed to uncover systemic failures had just exploded into the public eye in a way no training simulation could have ever predicted. Frank Matthews felt his pulse hammering in his neck as he watched the two federal agents efficiently bag Cynthia's torn passport evidence. For years he had prided himself on running a tight operation at Ascend Air's Atlanta hub, where on-time departures mattered more than complaints filed by passengers he considered oversensitive. But today, his fortress of shortcuts and hidden biases was crumbling under the weight of one woman's calm authority. Agent Chen turned to him, with a gaze so sharp it nearly cut him in half. "Mr. Matthews," she said evenly, "well, need immediate access to your gate security footage, employee logs for the past 48 hours, and your airline's full passenger verification protocols," Frank stammered, sweat beading on his brow. Yes, of course, I'll get it on that." His voice faded as Denise turned her attention to him for the first time, her eyes cool and piercing. "Mr. Matthews," she said, her tone carrying an undercurrent of final judgment. "This is not just about one racist gate agent. Your employee destroyed federal property in front of 50 witnesses while you stood by enabling her behavior. I will be recommending a full FAA audit of this hub effective immediately, and I assure you we will find more than just this incident." At that, Frank's shoulders slumped, and his mouth opened slightly, as if the air itself had betrayed him. Around them, passengers shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Denise's composed figure and Cynthia, who was now quietly sobbing, her tears streaking down her carefully powdered face. The airport police officer approached and gently grasped Cynthia's elbow. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Cynthia didn't resist. Her earlier smugness had dissolved into pale, trembling horror as she realized her life had been dismantled in under 5 minutes by a woman she thought she could humiliate without consequence. Denise watched silently as Cynthia was escorted away, her gaze unreadable. She knew this was only the beginning. Her mind was already cataloging the steps needed for Operation Safe Skies to expand. Because if a simple gate interaction could reveal systemic rot this deep, there was no telling how far the corruption and negligence extended across Ascend Air's operations. For her, the mission wasn't just about enforcing federal security. It was about restoring dignity and safety to an industry that too often underestimated the quiet power of accountability. As Cynthia disappeared down the long concourse flanked by airport police, Denise exhaled slowly, feeling her pulse settle back into a steady rhythm. But there was no time for relief. Agent Chen turned to her, speaking in a quiet voice that carried unmistakable respect. "Inspector Carter," she said, "what are your next directives?" Denise paused, scanning the bustling gate area that had become a silent amphitheater of judgment and revelation. Her dark eyes flicked to Frank Matthews, who was now frantically calling it and security supervisors with trembling fingers, his voice cracking as he tried to control the narrative slipping away from him like sand through a sieve. Denise spoke with quiet steel. "Secure all footage, interview every employee on shift today, and preserve every document touched by Ms. Parks or Mr. Matthews in the last 72 hours. This isn't about a single racial profiling incident anymore," she said, her voice low but firm. "It's about a compromised culture that endangers national security." Passengers began to disperse, some in hushed conversations, others still glancing at Denise with wide, reverent eyes. A middle-aged man in a worn denim jacket paused beside her, his hand trembling as he lifted his phone to record her one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you for standing up." Denise nodded once, acknowledging his words, then turned away, her mind already calculating timelines, legal pathways, and federal implications. Agent Davies approached, holding out an evidence bag containing the shredded passport, now marked and catalogued. "This will be Exhibit A," he said grimly. Denise took it, feeling the cool plastic under her fingertips. In that torn booklet lay more than proof of Cynthia's crime. It was a symbol of every microaggression turned overt injustice Black travelers had faced silently for decades, this time in front of an investigator with the power to ensure it wouldn't be ignored. She slipped the evidence into her backpack and straightened her shoulders. The operation she had built from a simple idea to a nationwide audit had just found its flagship case. And as she walked away from Gate B32, her sneakers silent against the polished tile floor, Denise Carter knew this wasn't just a victory. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would shake the aviation industry from its comfortable foundations, exposing the rotten roots that had hidden beneath sterile counters and polite announcements for far too long. The next 48 hours unfolded like a hurricane tearing through Ascend Air's Atlanta hub. Denise Carter established a federal command center in one of the airline's sleek corporate conference rooms, commandeering its polished oak tables and floor-to-ceiling windows that once hosted investor meetings and safety award luncheons. Now rows of laptops, secure servers, and grim-faced investigators replaced catered sandwiches and quarterly charts. Her team arrived in quiet waves, forensic accountants with eyes sharp as scalpels, aviation maintenance auditors who had shut down entire fleets before breakfast, and data analysts whose fingers flew across keyboards, pulling employee records and maintenance logs in real time. They were the FAA's elite National Security and Incident Response Division, the sharp end of the spear, and Denise led them with steady, unyielding resolve. By the second day, they had found enough to make Cynthia's passport destruction look like a drop in a poisoned well. Records revealed safety shortcuts that defied federal law, aircraft parts used beyond certified life cycles, maintenance checks, signed off by mechanics clocked in from vacation miles away, and inspection logs riddled with forgeries. Each discovery made Denise's stomach twist tighter with anger and grim satisfaction. She stood at the conference room's whiteboard lines of red and black markers, connecting names, roles, and violations like a spider's web. Frank Matthews' name sat at the center, circled in thick red ink. His complicity had allowed this culture to fester. Brenda Park's racism wasn't an isolated moral failure. It was symptomatic of a workplace where prejudice and negligence thrived unchecked under management's watchful blindness. As the sun set beyond the glass towers of Atlanta's skyline, Denise paused for a moment, her gaze fixed on the glowing amber horizon. She thought of the passengers who boarded these flights, trusting invisible systems to keep them safe. She thought of travelers like herself, targeted and humiliated for the color of their skin with no recourse. And she thought of the quiet power in her hands now, the chance to uproot systemic rot hidden beneath glossy branding and polite slogans. Turning back to her team, she said with quiet conviction, "We're just getting started. Let's make sure they never ignore a threat this obvious again." By the third day, the investigation's ripple effects reached far beyond Atlanta's airport walls. News outlets nationwide ran headlines like FAA launches major crackdown after inspector's passport destroyed by racist gate agent. Denise Carter found herself on video calls with FAA Director Evans and congressional oversight committees briefing them on the ROT uncovered at Ascend Air's flagship hub. Each report read like an indictment of decades-long systemic failure. Racial profiling complaints buried under customer misconduct labels, safety inspections, skipped to keep flights on schedule, and a documented pattern of intentionally delaying boarding for disabled or minority passengers to free up oversold premium seats for frequent flyers. What started with Cynthia Park's cruel act had blossomed into a damning expose of greed, negligence, and quiet bigotry that threatened both human dignity and national security. That afternoon, Denise sat across from Frank Matthews in his office. The smell of stale cologne clung to the mahogany-paneled room, mingling with his anxious sweat as he shifted behind his cluttered desk. He tried to muster the confident, managerial tone he once wielded like a weapon. "Look, Inspector Carter," he said with forced calm. "I understand there were lapses. I take responsibility, but surely—" She raised her hand, silencing him with the effortless authority of someone who had walked battlefields of bureaucracy and won. "Mr. Matthews," she said, her voice quiet, but edged with steel. "This isn't about minor lapses. Your employee committed a federal felony under your watch. Your station has falsified maintenance records, endangered lives, and fostered racial discrimination so blatant it could fill a civil rights textbook. You didn't manage a team. You enabled a crisis." He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Denise continued leaning forward, so her words cut through the shallow defenses he clung to. "Ascend. Air will be facing multi-million-dollar fines, years of federal oversight, and class action lawsuits before this is over. But you," she paused, locking eyes with him. You will carry the weight of knowing your choices didn't just end your career. They put lives at risk to protect your own convenience. Outside his glass walls, she could see her team moving with relentless focus, sifting through every hidden file and maintenance log. For Denise Carter, this was justice at work. And as she stood gathering her folders and snapping her laptop closed, she felt no triumphantly the heavy certainty that the work ahead was far from finished. The consequences fell like dominoes in the days that followed. Ascend Air's corporate headquarters scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing sterile press releases filled with hollow apologies and promises of immediate retraining initiatives. But their words couldn't stop the tidal wave of accountability unleashed by Denise Carter's investigation. The FAA levied one of the largest fines in aviation history, an amount so staggering that Wall Street analysts gasped on live broadcasts. A federal oversight team was embedded in Ascend Air's operations for a minimum of 5 years, monitoring every policy safety check and personnel decision. Passenger boycotts erupted nationwide, fueled by cell phone footage of Cynthia Parks ripping Denise's passport in half an image that had become a grim icon of arrogance and systemic prejudice. Cynthia herself was fired within hours of her arrest. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed federal charges for willful destruction of government documents, later adding civil rights violations to her indictment. Her mugshot, once filled with haughty defiance, now showed a hollow-eyed woman stripped of the corporate power she once wielded like a sword. Frank Matthews fared no better. He was fired, then arrested on charges of falsifying maintenance records that endangered hundreds of lives. Facing decades in prison, he took a plea deal, his name permanently blacklisted from the aviation industry he once believed he controlled. But it was Ascend Air as a whole that paid the steepest price. Their brand, once known for affordable comfort, was now synonymous with racism, corruption, and near-fatal safety violations. Stocks plummeted, CEOs were forced to resign, and families across America canceled flights in disgust. The young woman who had filmed the passport incident became a national hero for her courage, receiving quiet thanks from Denise herself in a handwritten note. And for Denise Carter, sitting in her quiet Washington, D.C. office, days later reviewing final audit summaries under the warm glow of her desk lamp, there was no celebration, only resolve. She glanced down at her replacement passport, freshly issued and unmarked by prejudice. It was a symbol not just of her identity, but of a simple truth she had proven yet again. When dignity meets ignorance and integrity meets corruption, justice will always rise to meet them. Because in her world, safety wasn't just about metal detectors and reinforced cockpit doors, it was about rooting out every hidden threat, even when that threat wore a name tag and a corporate smile. In the weeks that followed, Denise Carter continued her mission, quietly expanding Operation Safe Skies to other airline hubs across the nation. But late one evening, as she sat by her apartment window, watching the city lights twinkle against the dusky Washington sky, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of Cynthia Parks, blinded by her own prejudice. She thought of Frank Matthews, who traded integrity for convenience. And she thought of every quiet traveler who had ever been humiliated or dismissed simply because someone believed their dignity was disposable. Denise understood that real safety wasn't just about metal detectors or ID scans. It was about building systems rooted in respect, fairness, and unwavering accountability. Because prejudice isn't just a moral failing, it is a direct threat to the safety and humanity of us all. She sipped her tea and closed her eyes, feeling a profound truth settle within her chest. Power used to harm will always collapse, but courage used to protect will always endure. That is the lesson she carried forward, and the legacy she hoped to leave behind. What about you? Have you ever witnessed a moment where quiet courage changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story inspired you to stand firm for what is right, subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories of justice, integrity, and hidden heroes among us. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a reminder that dignity when defended changes the world.